I'm going to do this video and I'm going to share evidence. I'm going to break down the interview that Pete Hegseth did with Megyn Kelly. And all I'm asking for you to do, as the viewer of this video, is please be considerate and listen to everything. If you have a predisposition on this man, whether it be for him or against him, please just listen to his statements that I'm going to share. But I am, as a combat veteran, when he was a child, I do not forgive him for the statements that I'm about to show you that he said, and now he's trying to gaslight and basically kind of act like he never said the things that he did. And if he does get confirmed, he will harm the women in the military. So here's what he said, in case for those who've been commenting to me on my Twitter account saying that they don't ever have, I guess they didn't see this video, because he just recently did this very, very deceptive interview with Megyn Kelly, who is treacherously a traitor to women in uniform by her very just deceptive way that she did the interview. So listen to what he says, okay? I'm going to play this for you. I want you to hear with your own ears.
I'm straight up just saying we should not have women in combat roles. It hasn't made us more effective, hasn't made us more lethal.
Let's hear that again. He's very, very specific.
Combat. I'm straight up just saying we should not have women in combat roles. It hasn't made us more effective, hasn't made us more lethal, has made fighting more complicated.
Okay, this is a horrible thing to do to not only women in the military, which has been spoken out against by leaders around the world, military leaders around the world that have said that the media and social influence that this country has globally is very harmful. To have somebody like this, who's been nominated for the Department of Defense Secretary, to make comments like this. Women have served in combat roles for decades. Decades. When he was still a child, I was serving in a combat role. And I do not forgive him for saying these words. Now he's trying to act like he never said these things. And he's a charlatan. He's very, very deceptive. He'll do and say things. He's very manipulating and calculating. Then I'm going to show you in this video the actual police report with great details, even though there are things redacted, of the rape allegations and the referral to the DA. And some of the things that's not being talked about in the media, and most certainly not being talked about in his very deceptive, misleading, and biased interview that he did with Megyn Kelly. Okay, so here we go. Here he is being very evasive about his statements in the past.
Because I'm straight up just saying we should not have women in combat roles. It hasn't made us more effective, hasn't made us more lethal, has made fighting more complicated. Most of them actually are, a lot of them are pushed, I shouldn't say most, but many are pushed into a combat track because they're so highly capable, but if they had their first choice, probably wouldn't be that.
That is so not true.
Amazing women who serve in our military. Amazing women.
Do you think they should be in combat?
I think they're already in combat.
In fact, they are already in combat. But it's kind of not really inconsistent for a man who shows up drunk, allegedly intoxicated, in his underwear at none other than a war memorial. And it's kind of nervy for Donald Trump to nominate a man who says such things about women in combat when literally women used their bodies to shield him side to side with other men. This is an interview from yesterday, December 4th, 2024, and Megyn Kelly should just hide herself from the public based on this extremely biased, shameful interview, gaslighting the world, acting like he just never said these things about women in military. And then I'm going to tell you what the DOD actually defines a combat veteran as.
Whether we enter or not. And I'm humbled to be in a position where I can come alongside them and say, our men and women are ready, they're prepared, and if we have to use them, they're ready to win. And I'll always be thinking about those men and women that I serve with, because that's who I want to represent.
Okay, you cannot represent me nor other women when you gaslight and lie and act like you never said point blank that women have no business in combat. Because now he's facing heat. Now he's giving a completely different picture. This is what charlatans do. They'll do things and then act like they never did them. Now I'm going to go into the detail of the rape accusation because I'm going to show you, if you watch the interview with Megyn Kelly, it's very, very one-sided. It's very deceptive. It's very misleading. It's like this woman just lied and nobody thought he did anything wrong. He was completely cleared when in fact it was a very, very problematic situation. And by the way, for the record, she didn't contact the police, the Jane Doe. But one of the things that it was actually the nurse, okay, by law was required to do that. But the problem in the interview with Megyn Kelly is that he says that it's a smear campaign because there's no name. There's no name of the victim. It's a smear campaign. There's no name of the victim. He repeatedly brings out the fact that there's no name. And so what that tells me, that if he had his way, he would violate the law that requires, by the way, any victim, alleged victim of sexual assault or rape, their name is by law allowed to be protected. You know the woman who recently was a 13-year-old child that was raped by Diddy, and there's a picture of her and she had been given drugs, so that basically these roofie and these other types of drugs just make you completely compliant. It gives you almost like amnesia, and you just go along with anything. You can maybe have pieces of memory of what happened, but she's pictured on a table completely nude while he's eating off her stomach. Her name, her pictures are exploited all over the internet. Well, on YouTube, those images are being used for profit. She was a child. And it doesn't matter that they cover up her private parts. That's her body. And people that know who she was and could recognize her, they exposed her. Now her name is out there. And she did an interview recently. She was bawling because here she is. She has no attorney to represent her, to protect her, and yet her name is out there. And there's this big FBI case. She's one of the victims. And by law, of course, they redacted her name. This is law to protect rape victims, okay? But according to him, it's a smear campaign because there's no name given. See, that's what they do. They just protect, they don't give you the name, so you can go to that person and harass them for, But according to him, if he had his way, there would be no protection of rape victims. You see the problem here. After reviewing all of the video footage and conversations, he recommended it to be forwarded to the DA's office. Here's the problem with this case, and I'm going to share some things that happened in this incident that's not discussed by the media. There was another person who was being basically sexually harassed, wasn't particularly angry at him, but just did not think his actions by putting his hand on her knee was appropriate. This was a fellow worker, and so this person was happy that this Jane Doe, this other lady that, said that he raped, was very happy that she, basically came up, and he was called what they call a crotch blocker, which is kind of crude, blocker, because basically when a woman will show up when somebody is hitting on them and they're not, basically prevents that person from, continuing to bother them or whatever. But these are people who work together. This was a Republican Party, like some kind of convention, and he's over there hitting on women, and she didn't like it. And so this other woman reports that he did in fact do that. There is a text message in this police report of stating that this guy even hit on his wife. And so there are other people involved, but the problem was that she was given a roofie. And so that deletes her memory of being able to go to a jury and say without, to convince a jury without reasonable doubt that in fact he forced her, because she was very candid and said that, she does not know how she got to his room. She doesn't have a memory of getting back to her room. And so that's what those kinds of drugs do. They affect your memory. It doesn't mean she wasn't able to walk. It doesn't mean that, but it's just very problematic when somebody gives you those. But here's what needs to be done. There needs to be legislation that whenever somebody comes to an emergency room and says, I think I was sexually assaulted, I don't remember, I don't drink till I get drunk and pass out. That's not who I am. But somehow I ended up in some guy's room and I don't know how, and I think I was sexually assaulted. In that kind of situation, there should be mandated blood tests to test for roofies. Take example of the Lady Bird serial killer going on down in Austin, Texas, where roofie is being commonly used and they're killing people and they're ending up in the lake. And they're, of course, trying to deny that there's a serial killer. But one guy fell almost to his death from a bridge. He was pushed off a bridge and was robbed. And he survived, although he was severely injured, and they did a test on him, and he was given a roofie. So anytime these kinds of situations where alcohol is involved and, you think you might be assaulted, they should mandated by law to test for that. Because what would have happened if that's one thing they did not do. I don't see any record that they had tested her blood, but had they given her that test for a roofie type of drug, and it was present, then they probably would have had evidence to file charges on him. But these are very sketchy kinds of situations where, her memory was messed up like this. And that's probably why he wasn't able to file charges. But here's the thing I'm going to show you in this particular incident that's very important that the media, of course, is excluding. There were other people at this particular pool area on this night at this hotel that were complaining about a disturbance near the pool, and he was being very loud. But according to him, he wasn't drunk, but he was fuzzy, and he doesn't remember getting loud. Now, somebody who doesn't remember being loud, yet you were drinking, is somebody who has a drinking problem. And in the video interview with Megyn Kelly, he says, I didn't have any problem with drinking. And then he goes on, he literally showed up, let me show you this, at a war memorial in his underwear. And allegedly he was drunk. And then there were, of course, other accusations of him, drinking on the job and whatever. And yet he talks about, but for God, my Lord Jesus and Savior and my wife, I came out of that, time of darkness. And he should apologize for showing up at a war memorial in his underwear, because a war memorial is something that people, are supposed to go there to honor those who fell in war. And other people that go there really don't want to go there and see men in their underwear who's drunk at a war memorial. He was cursing and being very loud, and she was apologizing to other people, and she said that she intervened and told, name redacted, that they were Republicans, and she apologized for his actions. And then she tries to escort him out. And speaking of these videos, the video and the audio is something that is not allowed to be released because it doesn't fall under the Public Records Act. Okay, but this is the problem in this case why they could not file charges, because she did not immediately go. I'm sure that she was horrified. She was confused. This is not somebody who was attracted to him. Based on the text messages in this report, she was disgusted with him, the way he was treating other women, and the women were complaining about him. Not just the women, but men were complaining that he was hitting on his wife. There was somebody who states in this report that, so this is the guy that was hitting on my wife, and so, it wasn't just her, but does she sound like somebody who's like going to go and have sex with him? And she's angry at him. They're having an argument. And then the next thing you know, she's just this complacent person being led to a room with him, and she doesn't remember going to the room. She doesn't remember how she got back to her room. And that is all consistent with having been slipped a roofie. She was disgusted with this guy and apologizing for him. And they're having an argument out there by the pool. She got a venereal disease. that is one of the reasons she's like, oh my gosh, this guy assaulted me. And then her memory was messed up and she wasn't able to remember all the details. But when she went to when she went to the emergency room, she didn't give this guy's name. And the nurse was like, she reported to the police. The police contacted her and they asked for his name. And that is when she gave his name. There was no objective, like he wasn't anybody like in politics. He was just some veteran who ends up, in the Republican Party. She didn't like the guy. She didn't like what he did. And she was mortified. She was mortified. She didn't understand what happened. And that's what happens. That is what happens when you're out and you're drinking and then somebody slips you a roofie and you have to, how are you going to tell the police if you don't even know how it happened? But this is the kind of situation where definitely they should do blood tests to test for this, to see, if a roofie was in her blood. But it didn't happen. Okay? And so they did do an investigation based on this nurse contacting the police because she had asked for a rape test, but she'd already been home and showered and how do you even get any evidence but to see basically if there's any damage, because she did in fact have an infection is one of the reasons why she was concerned. And that happens when you have more than one partner, and she didn't. And her husband was against her. He knows what this guy is like. He knows what he's about. And so it's very obvious that she was slipped a roofie. This is a text message with somebody that says, oh, so you mean the guy who was trying to have sex with my wife? She had even texted with different person that the way he was acting like a creeper. And there was somebody who was complaining that him putting his hand on her was not appropriate and declined. When he invited her back to his room, she said no. And so basically this Jane Doe was being accused of being a crotch blocker because she shows up and this woman did not want to be with her. She said she observed him acting inappropriately with the women at the conference. He would rub on their legs and stuff like that. And she thought the actions was inappropriate. And even somebody else complained and said that they thought that it was inappropriate, he had done it to. Here is his comments to the police. He said that he doesn't understand how why she was in his room. But he wasn't drunk, but he doesn't understand why she was in his room, yet he had sex with her. He just minimizes and manipulates. Here is a guy who claims he doesn't have a drinking problem, yet he says he wasn't intoxicated, but he's confused why there was a woman in his room, yet he had sex with her. Okay, if you have a woman in your room that you're not sure why is there, why are you having sex with her? And yet you're not so drunk that you don't know what's going on or whatever, but yet you're having sex with a woman that you don't even know why she's in your room. I mean, this guy's so full of it. So this is the nurse. She is the nurse at the one where did, the test, and she was the one that reported it. She recommended the case be forwarded to investigations for their review. And the police, after looking at all the videos, surveillance videos or whatever, which some were missing, but he was able to see that he was arguing, he was being loud, there was this big argument at the pool, and so, yeah, she was discussing with him, she's apologizing to other people for his behavior. That was on video, but those videos are not allowed to be seen by the public. But he did recommend it. His recommendation after seeing everything wasn't discounting this woman. It was to be forwarded to the county DA's office for review. But here's the thing. These kinds of cases, this is not the kind of case you can take to a jury. There was no test done to show that she had been slipped a roofie. I think if they'd done the test, he would have been arrested. This is a problematic case. And for him to sit there and say, and just try to just defame this woman, who he paid, by the way, after she sued him, he didn't feel confident enough to go to a jury and to prove to a jury that there's no way that he ever did anything to her. I think she would had a strong case. She could have took it to the jury, and based on the videos that she would have full access to use in a court of law, but the public doesn't have access to, I think she would have won. And I think he knows that. And that's why he paid her damages. Okay? I do not forgive him for saying what he did about women in combat. Women have served in combat, and by the way, it doesn't take that much muscle to pull a trigger. Not only that, women in police force, they serve every day they put their uniform on. They never know what kind of situation is going to turn deadly. What traffic stop, what domestic call, what encounter. Will somebody whip out a gun suddenly because they may have a warrant on them? Happens all the time. And women have to take the lives sometimes of other people to defend themselves and other people. And that is not an easy thing to do. They face combat every day they put on that uniform. And then there's this. You see these humans who are shielding this man literally with their body because there's a shooter taking out people and trying to take out the potential president to be. There's a woman in that midst. There were other women there also. Well, those gunshots were firing across that stage. These women shielded this man with their own bodies. That's combat, y'all. He doesn't get to sit there and act like he never defamed women and say they don't belong in combat. And I also want to share a Bible story. In the Old Testament, God used the woman named Jael, and he honored her for defeating Jabin's army because she put a tent peg through the skull of Sisera and defeated the enemies and destroyed Jabin's army. God used a woman. I don't know that every woman could do that, but he knew who to choose. And maybe not every woman is somebody who could do specific jobs in the military, but there are women who's doing circles around men, and men who are not able to qualify through schools like Army Ranger School and other schools. But there are so many different types of jobs that don't include specific special forces or Navy SEALs or combat, and they face combat, dealing with hostiles. I was personally injured dealing with hostiles. Combat is not just specific roles in the military, and his comments are unforgivable without an apology. If he would just apologize and say what he said was stupid, and it was said in ignorance, or whatever, but he won't. He's trying to gaslight and act like he never said those things. He's dangerous. He's a dangerous person to be put in the position of Department of Defense because of his arrogance, his weakness, his inability to be humble, and just to even admit that he said things that were wrong. Instead, he tries to gaslight the world and act like he never said these things. He has no place in being nominated for the Department of Defense.